We're going to record to the cloud, and hopefully it doesn't take 3 hours like it did for a review session that I had with students this week. I had a review session for an exam, and it took the cloud about 3 hours to upload my file. And I've got emails from students going, "Where is it? Where is it?" I'm like, I wish I knew. Like, I'm wondering the same thing. This is no longer my fault. So I've got some good news for you. We're not having class on Monday. Surprise! I have been conscripted to drive with Byrne to drive some students to Chicago to help them do interviews and stuff at embassies. I will be leaving on Sunday, and I will not be coming back until Tuesday, which means we're not going to have class on Monday. So your objective, I am going to, I don't know if you knew this, but I actually taught this class hybrid last year. So I actually have all of the recordings that we are going to need. So I will send you one since we're not going to be in class on Monday. And I will send an email out because I know that not everybody's here. Since we're not going to have class, watch that lecture in lieu of coming to class. We're going to skip to psychological disorders. If we finish that early, we'll then move to social, but we're going to start with psychological disorders. So hope you enjoy your day off. I already told my drugs and behavior students all they have to do is watch a documentary that's on YouTube for free. They were very happy about that. So I won't be here. So if you need me, talk to me after break. Because I am leaving this weekend, here's something I can tell you. You know that normally I'm pretty good about getting grades back to you. I am going to take, because I'm not going to be here next week, I am going to take a little bit longer getting those booklets back to you and getting those grades to you, but I will have them by the time that we get back. Okay? So after Thanksgiving break, I know that's more than a week, but since I'm not going to be here, I don't want to take all of your books with me in case something happens. I'm always worried about taking student work with me because I'm always like, what if I lose my luggage or somebody steals my luggage and then all the grades go with it? So yeah, no class on Monday. Enjoy your time off and send good thoughts for me as I partially help drive that giant top-heavy van into Chicago. I already said no night driving. I have cataracts. Yeah. All right. So we are continuing our discussion of personality today. We're going to finish it up. We're going to finish strong. We're going to talk about the social cognitive perspective. So do you remember Albert Bandura and his Bobo doll study? I also don't know if I mentioned it in class. He actually passed away about a month or two ago. I think he was almost 100. So he seems like he had a pretty good long life. Hopefully it was a pretty good quality life as well. But we're going to talk about one of my favorite personality perspectives, which is developed by Bandura. It says Pandora. Okay, so this is the late Albert Bandura, and he basically said that our personality is the result of an interaction between our personality and the context that we find ourselves in. So personality is due to an interaction between the person and the social context that you find yourself in. So here's kind of an example. So you probably noticed I have a lot of energy and I have a lot of positivity. No, really? I bet you didn't know that. It's such a secret. But so something that kind of happens, and I don't know if you've had this experience too, when you're around people who have a very different personality compared to you. So for example, if I'm surrounded by really negative people who just want to complain, I often find that kind of amplifies my positivity, and I almost feel forced to be more positive than I already was to counteract all of the negativity that is in the environment around me. How many of you have had that? So for example, you're extroverted, you're very talkative, and then you're around a bunch of quiet people, and all of a sudden your talkativeness increases to basically counteract all of the quietness around you. So that's kind of a way that we can see that interaction between who we are and the environment that we find ourselves in. But it also affects the fact that you and I choose different environments for ourselves based on our personality traits. Like sometimes when I need something to do, I want to go to a mall. There are some of you who are like, malls are so crowded, I don't want to go to a mall. And it's all because of your personality traits. So one of the ways that we kind of see this social cognitive perspective kind of come into play is that in general, individuals choose certain environments for themselves. So there are very different ways that we interact with the environment around us. And this affects the types of environments we choose for ourselves. The type of music that you like to listen to is a part of your disposition. For example, for all of the talk that I had the other day about how open to experience I am, I think that only extends to food. I think that only extends to food, and I think that's because I like food. I mean, there are worse things to like. But in terms of music, I'm going to be completely honest with you, and some of you might be surprised by this because I play music, I make music. I don't really get jazz. I have tried, believe me, I can't get into jazz. And I'm very picky about classical music as well. The only thing in classical music that I really like is Holst's Symphony of the Planets. And specifically, I like Mars, the Bringer of War. And that's about it. Now, how many of you actually do like jazz? How many of you like classical music? Odds are pretty good. If you like those things and I don't, it's because we tend to prefer certain environments. Now, who here likes top 40? Me too. There is nothing wrong with that. Folks, I like Taylor Swift. I know that's very basic and there's nothing wrong with that. But generally what we're going to find is for people who prefer things that are routine, they are a little bit more traditional, they tend to prefer top 40. Although at some point you're like me and you're approaching middle age and you're like, I don't understand half of what's on top 40 these days. I'm just going to go listen to like my 90s and 2000s Sirius XM station so I can feel really old. Oh, hey, they just played New Kids on the Block. That makes me feel really old. So the kind of music that we like is based on our disposition. The type of school that you choose to attend is based on your disposition. It takes a certain type of person to come to a women's college compared to people who do not. You know, it takes a certain type of person to go to a really small school compared to people who do not. Folks, when you're absent, I know it. But if you go to a big state university and you're like in a lot of classes that I was in for psychology where there was 250 people, if you didn't show up, it wasn't the end of the world. How on earth are they even going to keep track that you're there? You know, it takes a certain type of person to appreciate those things. Not all colleges are good for all people. In hindsight, I did pretty well at a big giant state university, but I bet I would have really thrived at a smaller place where I could feel like a big fish in a small pond, as opposed to being a small fish in a gigantic pond. Our personalities shape how we react to events. Generally, who here is prone to being anxious? Hello, you're in very good company. You are going to react to situations very differently than people who are relaxed. that is going to basically affect how you respond. And your personality shape the situations around you. The way that you treat people affects how they treat you. So I believe it's not unheard of to hear this from Dr. Phil. And I'm sorry, I'm talking about Dr. Phil in this class. Like when I was in college, everybody's like, oh, you're going to be a psychologist like Dr. Phil. I'm like, Dr. Phil has let his license in marriage and marital and family therapy lapse. I will never be like Dr. Phil, ever. It made me very angry. But one of the things he says, and let's be clear, I don't necessarily always agree with this idea because I think it can lend itself to victim blaming. But how many of you have heard of the concept that we teach people how to treat us? Okay, so the idea is that the way that you treat people affects how they treat you. Now, sometimes it doesn't always work because sometimes I'm somebody who's generally pretty kind, or at least I try to be. I'm not perfect. I never claim to be. But I try to treat people with basic decency and respect. And part of the reason that you do that is because, folks, you don't live on an island. You don't want to burn bridges if you don't have to. But there are some people that may potentially take that kind of kindness and they may see it as weakness. And thus they may treat you a certain way because they know you will just potentially take it. But think about this. How many of you have somebody that you really dislike? We all have somebody. I do too. Please don't ask who it is. It's none of your business. And they may not even be here. But there's people I've really disliked. Odds are pretty good you have somebody that you dislike too. Now, as much as I try to treat most people fairly, I can tell you it's hard for me when there's somebody that I dislike. I don't want to look at them. I don't want to engage with them. It's just easier to avoid them. And here's the thing. People know that you are treating them differently. So if there's somebody that you don't like, odds are pretty good you're going to be treating them differently from somebody that you do like. And people aren't stupid. They notice that they're getting different treatment, and that is going to affect how they treat you. Oftentimes, I find that there is somebody that I genuinely do not like, not mostly because of the way that they treated me. And that kind of fuels the fire. So they treated me a way that makes me dislike them. That affects how I treat them. They dislike me further. And you can kind of see how the cycle repeats, which is why I would say I'm a big proponent of killing them with kindness. If nothing else, I am not saying don't have boundaries. I am not saying to not stand up for yourself, but by being kind, you can potentially break that cycle. Don't be a doormat. Don't ever be a doormat. Don't be like me. Okay. So when we talk about the fact that the way that we treat people affects how they treat us, we are talking about something that Bandura referred to, and I think this is one of the more interesting things. Bandura called this reciprocal determinism. So let's talk about what these words mean. So reciprocity means that I get back what I give. Reciprocity, I get back what I give. Determinism means that some things, if we can figure out all of the different variables in play, we can predict what happens next with pretty good accuracy. So determinism basically is the idea that we get this cause-effect relationship. So reciprocal determinism basically says your personality traits mold the environment and push against the environment. And likewise, the environment and other people shape you. So our personality traits, our corresponding behavior, because our traits affect our behavior, and our external environment all push against each other. You shape the environment likewise shapes you. Everybody good? I'm gonna have some tea. I am so sad that I only have 3 more weeks before I'm done teaching for the year. I know you're like, that's a nice problem to have. No, I'm gonna miss it. I don't know what's gonna happen when I'm gone. Like, I'm worried that, you know, that episode of SpongeBob where he's basically told to forget everything but fine dining and breathing, and you go into his brain and everything's like set on fire and running around.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that worries that certain things will be like that while I'm gone. I doubt it. I'm not that important. But I always worry because I'm a worrier. I'm anxious. This is how it works. Okay. So let's think a little bit about the social cognitive perspective. So one of the things that's really nice about this perspective is that it helps you pay attention to the effect of the individual and the relationship that you as an individual have to the environment around you and other people. But one of the things that some people have occasionally questioned with Bandura's perspective is that oftentimes it overemphasizes the situation and its role in shaping us, and it often tends to underemphasize the individual traits that can shape the situation. I want that chair. I will be right back. Yes, I am that person that likes to ride on shopping carts like that in the parking lot. You're never too old for that. All right. So is anybody going home for Thanksgiving? Okay, be safe, make good choices. Wear masks in crowded places. I went to the mall last weekend up in Overland Park, and I was just like, there's so many people. Ugh. How many of you are having Thanksgiving dinner here? Have a wonderful time. The food is always good. Yeah, last year I made Thanksgiving dinner at home by myself. It was Thanksgiving dinner for 2. My partner's family has like 70 people in it. Like, he has like 13 aunts and uncles. Yeah, one of those big rural farming type families and stuff. We're not having that many people this time for obvious reasons, but it will be nice. I enjoyed cooking Thanksgiving dinner last year. I made like a vegan sweet potato casserole, and I had a celebration roast, and I made homemade mac and cheese and stuff like that. It was fun, but it's nice to leave the cooking to somebody else. And because I'm going to Chicago now, I don't have to worry about bringing anything because I won't have time to cook anything. So it's a win-win situation. You good now? Okay. So let's finish up by talking about most of us, our very favorite thing, ourselves. Like, one of the things I've noticed since we started doing Zoom, I love to look at myself in that tiny little window. I'm like, yeah, you look good today. And to be fair, I didn't always think that about myself, so I consider that a victory, but I'm worried I'm becoming a bit too vain, getting the chance to look at myself all the time. I don't think it's a good thing. All right. So can I ask, how many of you feel like you like yourself? Like, generally, if I asked you, do you like yourself, what would you say? How many of you like yourself? How many of you are kind of in the middle? Like, some days you like yourself and some days you really don't. And how many of you just generally don't feel like you like yourself? That is okay. We're all kind of in a process, and I have my good days and bad days too. Like, there are some days where I'm like, I am the awesomest thing ever. And Then there are other days where I'm basically like Forky from Toy Story. I'm trash. I'm sorry. It's one of my favorite things from Toy Story 4. I'm trash. Okay. So one of the things that I want to talk about when we talk about ourselves, how many of you have done something really embarrassing in public? How many of you have done something embarrassing in public? And you were worried that everybody around you was looking at you and judging you. So I'm going to tell you a story about a research study. So it's not a personal story, it's a research study. So if you had to think, who would be like the cheesiest musician that you could ever have on a t-shirt? Don't say Taylor Swift. I've got so many Taylor Swift sweatshirts. Ed Sheeran. Okay, okay, cheesier. Keep going. Who's cheesier than Ed Sheeran? Okay, you gotta yell. Okay, you're all yelling at once. Who's cheesier than Ed Sheeran? Who? One Direction? Oh, you came out fighting. I was here. I was like in my first or second year of teaching when One Direction broke up. I don't judge. Many people were having very hard days in my cognitive psych class when Zayn left. Okay, cheesier than Ed Sheeran and One Direction. Keep going. Sting. I judge you for that. Sting is awesome. Sting is awesome. Okay. Maybe Phil Collins. Also, Phil Collins is awesome. Yeah, Genevieve. I was gonna say like Meatloaf. Meatloaf. Oh gosh, my mother would be so disappointed. I grew up listening to Bat Out of Hell so many times. VeggieTales. VeggieTales. Okay, that's for children. So things for children by nature are cheesy. Like Barney the dinosaur by nature is cheesy. Okay. How about Barry Manilow? Is Barry Manilow pretty cheesy? Barry Manilow, he has that song Mandy, which of course with my name, I've had people want to sing that to me and I'm like, you do not ever get to call me Mandy. Dr. Roy did that one time and I was like, please don't ever do that again. Okay, so Barry Manilow, cheesy. The equivalent would be like Ed Sheeran or maybe Phil Collins or something like that. So if you had to wear an Ed Sheeran t-shirt at a party, how would you feel? You'd feel sick. Would you worry that everybody was looking at you and judging you?
I mean, I love attention, so no.
Well, points for honesty. Now, what about the rest of you? If you had to wear a cheesy musician on a shirt, how would you feel? Pretty embarrassed? Would you worry that everybody was staring at you? So this is what's called the spotlight effect. When we do something embarrassing or we worry that we're being embarrassing, we think there's a big spotlight on us. We worry that there is a big spotlight on us and everyone is watching us and judging us. So for example, I can tell you that for a while when I was heavier, one of the reasons I didn't go to the gym was because I worried that people would see this heavy girl on a treadmill or on the elliptical and they would judge me and make fun of me. Here's what I've learned as an adult. And folks, I don't always feel this way, and I know you don't believe me. It does get better. So let's go back to those students wearing the Barry Manilow shirt at a party. The researchers basically found that for the most part, nobody even noticed that they were wearing Barry Manilow shirts. And moreover, those who noticed didn't care. So they didn't judge the student harshly for having on a cheesy musician on their shirt. So this is what I am trying to tell you. The person who probably cares the most in these kinds of embarrassing situations is yourself. Most people are not judging you the way that you think they are. And if they notice that you did something embarrassing, most of the time, they do not care. There was actually some research that came out that found that most people, so we tend to assume that people don't really think about us very much. People do think about us probably about as much as we think about them. But the good news is that they tend to not be too harsh about us. They tend to have goodwill towards us. So this is just my reminder. I know that it feels like everything is a big deal. And I know when I was a teenager, the last thing I wanted to do was embarrass myself. Most people do not care. And if they care, they're not really people you want to be around, right? You want to be around people that like you for you. You shouldn't have to bend yourself into a pretzel to be somebody that you're not to fit in. That comes with a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience, and also finding out that I'm neurodivergent. Sometimes you're just not going to find your people, but you have people, but they may not necessarily be the people that you're around right now. So if you don't feel appreciated, do know that there are people out there who will love you for who you are and appreciate you. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't all have flaws that we should try to improve, but there is somebody out there, I don't know who they are, that will love you and accept you for you. And someday you will find them. So be hopeful. I don't know if this helps. I accept you. I love having you in my class. And even if it feels like nobody cares, folks, I care. And I know I'm just your professor, I'm just your instructor, but I hope that that makes your day a little brighter, knowing that at least one person sees you and thinks you matter. So let's kind of talk about our self-esteem, and we're going to talk about this more. So when I asked you if you liked yourself, that's when we're talking about self-esteem. So most of us tend to feel like we like ourselves pretty well. And we'll talk some more about self-esteem in a minute. We know that self-esteem is important. It's a lot easier for us to deal with the challenges of life and meet our goals if we have a good enough feeling that we deserve good things. And then finally, I want to talk about one more kind of effect of the self. We have something called a self-serving bias. Some of us love ourselves so much that we prefer things that relate to us than things that do not relate to us. We often may not be very willing to kind of take the blame for things. So I remember when I was in 7th grade, my pre-algebra teacher actually shared us examples of excuses that people gave when they get into car accidents from insurance companies. And one of the ones that I remember was somebody basically said, a hedge jumped out of nowhere and I didn't see the other car. People want to protect their sense of self so much that sometimes this means that they will not even admit fault for the things that they do. And I think that's really funny. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the benefits of self-esteem. So here's the thing. High self-esteem is not always a healthy thing. So I think when we talk about self-esteem, it's really easy to believe that higher is always better. And that's not always the case. You don't want self-esteem that is high and is fragile. Do you know people who have really inflated views of themselves, but as soon as you give them criticism, they either lob back the same insults as you in a way to project, or they get really, really upset. They will criticize anybody else around them, but as soon as you lob it back at them, they're like, oh no, you're like that. I've known many people like that. Probably one of the #1 hallmarks that I've seen of a fragile, high self-esteem is when I bring up a legitimate concern or criticism that was asked for, and folks, I am many things, but I am not harsh. I always, always, always try to temper what I'm saying with kindness. And here's kind of a hallmark of high self-esteem that's fragile. As soon as I lobbed those complaints, I would get, well, you do the exact same thing that you say that I do. That just goes to show me two things. This person can't take criticism, and they're lobbing my criticism back at me. They're not original. They didn't think of something more original, which means it's probably not about me at all. So that kind of self-esteem is not the kind of self-esteem that we want to have. It takes a lot of practice to be better at handling criticism, but it also takes a strong enough sense of self to know that not everybody's going to agree with you. Not everybody's going to like you. And what's more, they might not like you for the dumbest reasons or for no reason at all, because life is weird like that. But it takes a healthy sense of self-esteem to be able to deal with setbacks, with criticism, with people that don't agree with you or people that dislike you. It takes a good sense of self-esteem to have that resilience and that grace and have a solid sense of who you are, even when things are going badly. Like, bad things are going to happen. People are going to disagree with me, but that doesn't actually change my inherent value and worth as a human being. And that's true for all of you too. So we can have healthy self-esteem. High does not always mean healthy, but low is not healthy either. You are a human being. You have inherent worth and value just by virtue of being here. And there are things that you can do that other people cannot. You have something unique and special to bring to the table. So low self-esteem can be really hard in that respect, because you're basically saying, I have no value. Low self-esteem can lead to some problems. Generally, I tend to find that the people that are most critical and judgmental, and I would include myself in this, I can be really judgy, and it's hard to get out of it. The people who tend to be the most judgmental and critical of other people, they're probably applying it to themselves too. It's almost like a preemptive thing. Like, I feel terrible about myself, I judge and I criticize myself all the time. And to basically prevent other people from hurting me the way that I hurt myself, I'm going to go ahead and lob judgments and criticism at them and devalue them, so that if they say something, it won't hurt me. And nobody can hurt me worse than I hurt myself. That is something a lot of us need to work on, myself included. Some of us are our own worst enemies. There is nothing that nobody in the outside world could do to me that I haven't done worse to myself. And I'm sure there are some of you who are like that as well. So we may view ourselves critically, and that's going to affect the way we treat other people. Insecure people generally are either going to devalue people, or they're going to work to please people, even if it goes against their values. And now, one thing that I will mention that your book mentions, sometimes low self-esteem happens because we're not honoring ourselves the way that we should. Or maybe there are things in our life that are not going well. So sometimes low self-esteem can reflect aspects of our reality. If you are being mistreated by somebody repeatedly, I would not expect most people to have a good sense of self after sitting in that for so long. Or maybe you're having trouble meeting your goals, and sometimes self-esteem can be low because of that. Maybe you're not living your life right. But that's where I want to be careful, because there are amazing people who are high achievers, who are very successful, and they still hate themselves. So self-esteem can be a reflection of our reality, but it's not guaranteed. So I would be really careful. Again, I don't like the idea you have low self-esteem because of bad things you did. No, sometimes people just have low self-esteem. So I want to talk about self-serving bias, the way that we try to protect our sense of self. This is a readiness to perceive ourselves favorably. So how many of you have had this happen? And it could be in this class or it could be elsewhere. How many of you have gotten a bad test grade and your first instinct? Now, some of you, what I really appreciate is y'all will own up if you didn't study. Like, I find that most of you are like, yeah, I didn't study for this one. I started looking at the exam the night before. And I'm like, points for honesty. But how many of you have had this happen where you get a bad grade? And yeah, it could have been due to the fact that you didn't study enough, but your first instinct is to go, the instructor wrote hard questions. How many of you have done that? You're like, the test was too hard, and that's why I didn't do well. Yeah, Mariah. Oh, okay. You were saying, yeah, that's okay. So that is a self-serving bias sometimes, rather than admit that it might be our own efforts that caused this to happen. It's somebody else's fault. The example that I gave of getting into a car accident because, oh no, a hedge just suddenly jumped into my view and I didn't see a car. It couldn't be that I wasn't paying attention. But I want to be clear too. Generally, these things are not either or. Sometimes your instructors do write hard test questions. I know sometimes I write ones that are hard to understand, you know, and sometimes y'all didn't study enough. But I think self-serving bias is basically protecting ourselves because we don't necessarily want to admit that we could have done better. Okay, so one of the other things we find is that there is some unrealistic optimism, and generally we like things that are associated with us compared to things that are not. Would somebody share their favorite letter? Letter, like what's your favorite letter in the alphabet? Wait, who said Q? Okay, can I ask you, is that in your middle name at all? Okay, interesting. Anybody else? Yeah, Mariah. M. Anybody else? Anybody else? Yeah, Chelsea. Huh? C. How many of you have a favorite letter that is in your name? How many of you have a favorite letter that is not in your name? Okay, interesting. My favorite letter is G. Duh. So one of the things that we find is that we like things that are associated with us or are related to us more than we like things that are not. If you found out that somebody shared your birthday, you would like that person more than somebody who did not share your birthday. I'm the weirdo. If somebody shares my birthday, I get mad. I am the only one that is allowed to have that birthday. Very, very briefly, we had two other people here at Cotty who had the same first name as me because it was a very popular name in the 80s. Nobody else can have that name, only me. And now they've both left. I'm like the Highlander. There can be only one. That might be a self-serving bias as well. I'm the most special and the most unique. I truly am an Enneagram type 4. All right, but most of us, this is what's called the name letter effect. Now, not all of you fit with this, but we do actually find that people tend to prefer letters that are in their own names compared to letters that are not in their names. We tend to like people that share our birthdays compared to people that do not. We probably like people that share our zodiac signs more than people that do not. Huh?
I said absolutely not.
Okay, one of my lab mates from grad school is a Sagittarius as well, but she's kind of an earlier Sagittarius. Like her birthday occasionally coincides with Thanksgiving. To put this into perspective, mine occasionally corresponds to Hanukkah, but not this year because Hanukkah is really early. But I like her a lot, but I also use the fact that we're kind of different from each other as evidence that the zodiac is bogus. We're both Sagittariuses, but we're completely different from each other.
Okay, so how many of you are negative about yourselves? We know that self-esteem is important and that a healthy level of self-esteem, along with the ability to take feedback, is so important. So why are we so hard on ourselves? And you'll even find this with Hollywood celebrities, folks. How many interviews have you seen where people are like, oh yeah, I was a real loser back in high school. I wasn't popular at all, and everybody thought I was ugly. Like, even celebrities are really negative about themselves. So one of the things that we may find is that oftentimes we're negative about ourselves, usually when we make a mistake. And we believe that that will keep us from making mistakes in the future. And folks, I gotta tell you, as a means of preventing those mistakes, it's generally not very good. My mom had the experience a couple of years ago when and to be fair, I was going through a really tough time. I was starting to have my panic attacks and stuff. And I was driving with my mom and Dr. Roy in the car, because she's my friend. We went to Springfield and I made some driving mistakes. I'm like, I'm so stupid. And my mom goes, I really wish you wouldn't call yourself stupid. And I said, Mom, I don't actually think I'm stupid. But my mom said something that I think is really important. This is still something that I kind of struggle with. And I have a feeling for some of you, this might be something you struggle with too. So I want to give you the advice that she gave me. You may not think you actually believe it, but when you repeat those thoughts to yourself, you are creating a habit. You are basically creating a new network in your brain. And the thing is the more that you use that, the more it becomes a habit. And it can be really, really hard to break. Your thoughts, eventually, if you repeat them enough, even if you say you don't believe them, will become the very first thing that you do in times of trouble. Even if you don't believe you're stupid, your mind is going to act like it is, like you do. So be careful about the thoughts you think. Just because you think something doesn't make it the truth. Your brain just wants to think. That doesn't mean you have to latch onto it. So we may do this to keep ourselves from repeating mistakes. Sometimes we do this to get feedback from people and validation from people. You go to your friends, I suck and I'm terrible. And your friends will go, oh, no, you're not. You're wonderful. You don't have to trash yourself to get validation from your friends or your partner. Or maybe sometimes you have a snarky partner like I do, and I'm like, I'm terrible. And he'll go, yeah, you are. Now you know what to do differently next time. Yeah, like some people will not play that validation game, so be prepared. Additionally, sometimes we do this when we are preparing for failure. So I've had instances, even in this class, where people take an exam and they talk about what a terrible job they think they did. And of course, they never do as bad as they think. But by trashing themselves preemptively, they are preparing for the possibility that they got something worse on the exam. And generally, we tend to find that our worst fears never really come to pass. And then finally, sometimes we put down our old selves to basically remind ourselves of the progress we've made. So this is something I do a lot. I was not a popular kid. I was a very bullied kid. And I think a lot of the ways that I think about myself, like some of you probably got bullied and you were able to brush it off, but because of the way I'm wired and because of the way that I kind of struggled with it, it's been harder for me to unlearn some of those thought patterns. And so sometimes it's really easy for me to go, yeah, look at me, I'm totally awesome. I used to be a loser when I was a kid. Like, you don't have to trash your old self that way. That old self is still a part of you and a part of who you are. And it's what makes you the person that you are now. So I would encourage you, and I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I've got all of these completely nailed down. We all deserve to be kind to ourselves. I don't think there's anything so terrible that you could have possibly done in your like 18, 19, 20 years of life that is so terrible that you don't deserve to be kind to yourselves. So do something nice for yourself this weekend. Doesn't have to be big, but do something nice for yourself. You've earned it. Okay, so we're going to finish up. I believe this is our last slide. So once we're done, we are done. So there are some differences across cultures. So here in the United States and in general, in a lot of the Western Hemisphere, we talk about personal self-fulfillment. The most important thing is the individual. We emphasize personal goals, personal liberties, personal freedoms, and the like. And your identity comes from your personality traits, your own individual traits. And so these cultures are often referred to as individualistic cultures. Now, on the other hand, there are other cultures. Typically, these tend to occur more often in the Eastern Hemisphere, but it's not guaranteed. We have more collectivist cultures. So, for example, Japan would be a more collectivist culture. Here, it is not about the individual. It is about the group or your family or things like that. Your identity does not come from your personality traits. What is more important is the family that you belong to or the group that you belong to. And the goal is the well-being of the group or the collective over that of the individual. So these can vary across cultures. Other cultures do not care about the self as much as, for example, people in the United States do. So do keep that in mind. All right, folks, this is pretty much all I had. I will send you a link to a short video. I think it'll be maybe about 20 minutes on psychological disorders. Watch that on Monday. Couple of quick announcements. You have a quiz that posted this morning. It is due on Monday, even though we're not going to have class. That very same day, a new quiz is going to open up. And that won't be due until the Monday we come back. So we got two quizzes, rapid fire, one that's due on Monday and one that's due the following Monday, okay? So that other quiz will be open for over a week, so you have time to take it. Don't take it on Turkey Day. Enjoy your break, rest up. If you haven't turned in your group member evaluations, email them to me by this evening. And have a wonderful day and have a wonderful break. And I'll see you all when we get back.